Hello again, everyone. You're joining us for another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. My name is Jeff Mix. I'm head of content and research. My guest today is Paul Bradley of TraceGains. Some of you may remember Paul and I did an episode over the summer about food safety. We're meeting now at the North American Food Manufacturing Summit, but we'll be having a conversation about how data can build stronger supplier relationships, some of the exciting things AI is doing with data, but also tempering expectations in terms of there's optimism, but also what is really happening. I think this is going to be a terrific conversation. Paul, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
I remember in our last conversation, we wanted to talk a lot about how data can be used as a tool to tell stories, to justify what people are doing, to demonstrate value, to say, hey, this is the resources we need and this is what we can do when you give us those resources. Is that still a conversation that we're having when we're talking about our suppliers?
I think it is, with the caveat that, the story we tell with data had better be true when we're talking about building, what are ultimately some of the most important relationships that are going to enable our business altogether. And so many factors right now are, I think, pushing brands and pushing manufacturers to really have to think deeply about the kinds of supplier partnerships that they want to have. Do I have not just the right suppliers in terms of material, but do I have the right long-term partners? Do they have the agility? Do they have the flexibility? Do they have the vision? Are we aligned in terms of what we want to do together over the next few years? And can they help us weather the storms that are still impacting the industry ongoing? It's a really, really serious question.
Yeah, and I suppose when we're talking about collecting data that can answer some of those questions, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It has to be a tailored approach to ask good questions to get good answers.
It's not, and it really needs to reflect the things, of course, that are most important to that brand and to that manufacturer, and everyone's circumstances are different. However, I think at the same time, there are some common challenges that everyone is dealing with. And one of those that I would point to immediately is that multiple factors converging on the need for greater traceability, transparency in the supply chain. We face that in terms of food safety, traceability, especially here in the U.S., but we also are thinking about things like carbon neutrality, greenhouse emissions, child labor and forced labor in the supply chain. We're thinking about it in terms of things like deforestation, especially for brands operating in Europe. So, really thinking about, can I find the right partners that are going to not only help me get the products I need, which are very unique to me, but help me with the transparency, the traceability, the ability to really look up into the supply chain and help me look down into my distribution channels that almost everyone needs to deal with now.
So when you're having this conversation with clients and they're saying, we want to take a good look at our supplier base, how are they setting up a system to capture that data that matters to them in a way that, the supplier presumably wants to be transparent, but also wants to be seen in a good light? Like there needs to be honest answers to honest questions. Like I can see that being a real challenge.
It's a real challenge. And you're getting at something that I think is really fundamental, which is we're kind of getting to a place now where it's more than just, hey, supplier, send me a bunch of documents, or hey, supplier, fill in a bunch of forms. We're needing to still do those things and collect standard data as far as products and attribution and allergen statements and certifications and all that good stuff. But increasingly, we also are really needing to have the ability to combine that data with information that's coming from outside of my four walls, maybe even outside the walls of the supplier. I'm thinking here about things like environmental intelligence data. Am I dealing with products that have come from an area that is in violation of the EU's 2020 deforestation baseline? That's a non-trivial question to go and answer. Am I thinking about incident data? Am I thinking about potential import issues? Something that may be impacting that supplier in another product that I don't even typically acquire, but that I might still want to know about. So really thinking about this complex universe of data, some of which you have direct access to, some of which you don't, how to gather that data, both internal and external, and whoosh it together in a way that's useful. That is getting to be, I think, the crux of the challenge for a lot of brands right now.
Now, as you're describing that to me, I start thinking there are so many moving pieces in that. How is any one person keeping it in their head? And I wonder if this is when we start talking about large language models.
You nailed it. Yeah, no, exactly. This is right where I think, as we're looking at this increasingly complex problem space, it becomes very natural in today's technology environment to say, well, there's got to be an artificial intelligence solution to help me with doing that. And the world of intelligence sourcing is definitely something that is happening. It's an area where TraceGains is working and investing. The idea of, hey, I don't want to just go in and put some ingredient specifications into Google. I want to go and actually have a dialogue with a system that's going to help me narrow down my choices and apply a lot more intelligence to helping me make a sourcing decision. But that is also where we need to become pretty realistic about what artificial intelligence can do for us. You mentioned LLMs. You're absolutely right. The big hype over the last year has been around large language models and what they can do for us. But that's also where I think we're seeing now some friction in the sense that, what is it, the famous large language models that we all have been so excited and having so much fun playing with, really were built around the idea of let's go out into the internet, let's scrape a lot of information, let's apply some algorithmic intelligence to that. And let's create something where when I ask that system a question, it gives me a very confident, high confidence answer to what I asked it. Problem being, in a lot of the LLM AI models that are out there, the data that you're collecting isn't necessarily sourced from places that are contextually appropriate to what professionals in the food and beverage industry need, right? If I'm really trying to answer a formulation question and the data being used to construct that answer is sourced from a recipe subreddit, I may or may not be really getting what I'm looking for. I may not be getting input from professionals in my domain. I may be getting input from a guy with a really good homemade falafel recipe, which is probably terrific, but probably not what we're trying to get to. So thinking about AI in terms of LLMs, but also now in terms of more narrowly applied AI, I think is where we really are headed next.
And, to build off of what you said, I think there has been a lot of hype. There has been a lot of promises. There's been a lot of wishful thinking about what AI is going to do. And we are now reaching the point of but what is it doing? Give me an actual example that people could say, this is good and this is bad. This is a thing that it's a real business challenge that companies are facing right now. And if it works, it's a game changer. How far into it? Is it still science fiction or is it science fact at this point?
I think that it's science fact, but I think that we're starting to really get our collective arms around the challenges of what's required to build not the AI itself so much as the contextual data that sits underneath it, the data structures, the data ontologies that need to exist. And just to elaborate briefly on what I mean by that, again, it's in AI at the end of the day is only ever going to be as good as the information that we feed it. And it's only going to be as good as our ability to train it and give it ways of thinking, in finger quotes about that information. So what I think we have learned and are learning now how to apply is that AI can, in fact, be trained to think in terms of, for example, a food science context, where when we're having a dialogue with that artificial intelligence that is about a recipe, it is thinking about that in terms of the way that we would formulate a product for a commercial application versus the way that I might make something in my kitchen that, hit a home run with my kids on a Saturday afternoon. So that is within the realm of the possible, but it really involves thinking a lot about how we structure data, how we collect data, how we curate it, and how we create those contextual environment or contextual data ecosystems, I should say, surrounding that information so that when the AI addresses the question we put into it, it's addressing it through the mind of, again, for example, a food scientist versus the mind of, just a consumer or a hobbyist cook. Those are very different contexts, but the AI can be taught those. And I think that's where things are starting to get really interesting.
Yeah, and I can also see when we talk about building long-term business partnerships, a huge element of that partnership is they're thinking the same way about data collection. They're thinking the same way about what they're trying to get out of the questions they're being asked. It's almost a new part of building a business partnership is we are committed to making this work and we need you to be too.
Exactly. And that's a great way to put it because I think that takes us to where, okay, so how the heck do I actually solve for that? In a modern food and beverage industry context. And, one of the ways to get at that curated data set or that higher quality contextual data set is to look for networks where data is being exchanged and where standardized data is being exchanged by entities that are kind of on the same page as far as what they're trying to achieve. At TraceGains, our networked ingredients marketplace, TraceGains Gather, is an example, and it's not the only one by any means, but it's an example of a network where suppliers, brands, manufacturers are exchanging standard data. They're working together in a common framework of things they're trying to do, source ingredients, create products. And that network produces a lot of data, but more importantly, it produces data that's of a very high contextual contextual consistency and quality, such that we can start to pull insights out of the data that network itself produces. So, bringing it back around to how we do go out there and find good suppliers, I think it puts a lot of emphasis on, are there networks that I can become part of? Are there communities and ecosystems that I can leverage to have those conversations, to make contact with suppliers, or as a supplier to make contact with customers, where that data structure is essentially built into what's happening? And I think that's going to be an area where we'll see a lot of progress moving fairly quickly, bringing that applied AI into action where the data underlying it is kind of set up for success.
I know we were talking mostly about the sourcing and procurement side of this, and of course that's important. I mean, as you say, the person who's making chocolate chip cookies in a factory is wondering where his chocolate came from, whereas the person who's making chocolate chips in a kitchen wants to say, am I using semi-sweet or am I using dark? It's two different questions with two different answers. But I have to go a little bit beyond just sourcing and say, the company that makes chocolate chip cookies makes lots of other things too, and is always trying to come up with new products, grow their market share, move into new markets. So can we talk about that end of things where they're innovating, where they're trying to make new things that haven't existed before? Is this pooling of data going to be a resource there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if there's one lesson that I think I've really absorbed personally in the last couple of years looking at this problem, it's, every function in an organization is an innovation function. In the same way that every function in a modern brand or manufacturer is involved in supply chain resilience. Sourcing and procurement, if we're still thinking of those as really separate silos doing separate things from innovation and R&D, I mean, we're thinking about it the wrong way. And I think all mature brands out there have figured that out at this point. But, really, if I'm going out there and I'm innovating and I'm creating new ideas and I'm doing that in a vacuum where I'm not thinking about how I'm going to get those products, can I source and scale? Can I do that in a way that aligns with my sustainability department, what they're doing? Can I do that in a way that meets my economic objectives and what I'm trying to achieve as a company? Right? All of that has to come together. And being able to use that common set of high quality normalized data as a baseline for doing that, I think is just, it's a fundamental capability that all brands that are going to really thrive in the market in the next 10 years are going to have to be good at.
So, I mean, we started off the last question talking about innovation and why it's important. I do want to talk about TraceGains as a leader in this space. I know when you and I were talking over the summer, you were very excited about some things that you were about to come to market with. Here it is a few months later. What makes TraceGains a leader in the space? What is new that you're doing in the space that you want to share with people?
Yeah, I think the thing that is most exciting is exactly that notion of breaking down traditional walls between silos. We've been, hollering that battle cry for a few years now, and I'm really proud of how we're making it a reality. We have built what I think is really the preeminent network out there in terms of a real data-driven network for suppliers and brands to work together. And there's that, I always say, networks aren't platforms, right? They're not technology. Networks are people exchanging information. The history of the 90s to today is littered with failed social networks that maybe had a cool platform but never got off the ground, right? So I think we built the strongest network for the food and beverage industry, for the exchange of data, for the free flow of information. And we're pulling that together with sustainability, big part of what we've been talking about this summer. How do we bring in some of that external, third-party data from around the world and enrich that network? And then how, as we just discussed, how do we make that really relevant and useful and put it where an innovation team, R&D team needs it to be when they're moving quickly, getting great ideas, iterating on new products, and just bring that whole, less siloed, more interactive, more collaborative factory together. We've always wanted to do it. I think we've always been chipping away steadily at it. And right now, I think the convergence of technology where the industry needs to be, we're moving fast. That's really fun.
I appreciate TraceGains already has a big footprint in this industry. You've got a lot of partners. There are probably still companies that when they hear this episode, they're saying, I'm not involved in this yet, and I don't know what getting started looks like. What is that process? If someone is saying this all sounds well and good, and if it's the future 10 years from now, I should get started now, what is the getting started?
The absolutely easiest first place to start, and what I would encourage anyone to do because it's free and it's openly accessible is come to gather.tracegains.com and check out the network. Come in and search for products. Take a look at the networked ingredients marketplace that we offer. Take a look at some of the suppliers that you likely already work with who are on that network and what they're offering. Get a feel for some of the data that is out there that powers that network and that moves through it. And then we would love to join the conversation with you at that point and help you think through how that can apply to your quality safety efforts, how that can flow through to your sustainability strategy, how that can speed up and empower your innovation. But, the first step is, don't just listen to a bald guy. Come check out the network, see what's out there, see what we're doing, get a feel for the kind of information that our network is built on, and see if it resonates with you. I'm guessing if you're in this industry, it probably will.
So I do want to talk a little bit about the privacy aspect of data, because we are talking about performance metrics. We're talking about where things are coming from and where they're going and what they cost and in what quality and quantity. And a lot of people are trained, hey, those are my cards they play. And you're just saying go to a website and there's information there. Where did that information come from? Do they know it's being shared? Let's disarm this possible suspicion people may have.
I absolutely, and thank you for raising that question, because it is crucially important. I mean, at the end of the day, you are talking about, and we are, often helping customers manage some of their most critical intellectual property. When we set out to build TraceGains Network, we thought, what are the good things that we can take from social networks, for example, and how can we really apply those to a business network and really make it work for the industry? And one of the fundamental pieces of that is nothing is ever on our network that you don't choose to put there. You are always in control of the information you choose to expose. You are always in control of the information that people can find, access, and interact with. And we don't ever do anything with the information that is going on behind the scenes of that violates anyone's right to their crucial data, their crucial IP. We take that incredibly seriously. We would have not one customer at all in food innovation if we weren't deadly serious about protecting people's IP. But at the same time, what you do choose to put out there on the network, what you do choose to share, can be really meaningful in the kind of conversations that you can have. And like I mentioned, we are in a world where I think there is a lot of pressure on both brands and suppliers to be more transparent, to be a little bit more open, and we want to give people the control to choose how far down that path they want to go. But the protections at the end of the day for suppliers and brands, they're ironclad. We test them all the time. We certify them externally, and we take it very, very seriously.
Terrific. I guess maybe the next question I've got then is for the people who are saying, this sounds great, and now I'm not, worried immediately about my data. When they get started, how long does it take from yes, I'm interested in this to I'm starting to see results that were based on my level of interest in the first place? What is a typical timeline? I appreciate no two people's stories are all the same, but what is realistic?
Yeah, for sure, no two people's stories are the same, and it really depends on the objectives that you have, right? But TraceGains Network in our marketplace is available for anyone to use anytime. Like I said, you can go in there and start connecting with suppliers today, right? You can do that immediately and start creating some of those connections, or as a supplier, start choosing some items that you want to have out there on the network and start getting interactions with people. So that simple level is, hey, it's turn the key and you're off and running. For those who really want to start dealing with a more sophisticated application of the data using, for example, our supplier management tool, where they're connecting to their suppliers, their data, their documentation, and then really bringing it in to dashboard it, to scorecard it, and to start that data flowing through other parts of their operation. Again, it really depends on your scale and depends on your size, but absolutely you can be up and running, and implemented in a 30-day time period. Some organizations are going to spend longer than that, depending on what they want to achieve and how much information they want to bring in. We really fundamentally work with everyone to tailor an implementation plan and process that's going to work for them and be supportable inside the parameters of their business. But yeah, it's no hard and fast answer, but we are there to help people move as quickly as they are able to, and as quickly as they need to for their business.
And that leads me to my next question, of course. This isn't a turnkey solution where they've bought access and then they never hear from TraceGains again. This is a partnership that is ongoing, and when they have specific things they're trying to achieve, they have insights from the people who have a lot of experience doing that.
We really are incredibly proud of our customer success management team, of our support organization. They're world class. They're primarily U.S. based, although now we are becoming more of a presence in Europe, so we're building infrastructure there as well. We've always put a lot of attention and a lot of resource behind making sure that we were able to meet our customers where they needed us to be, and definitely real people picking up the phone, answering real questions, getting onto the discussion and onto the screen with you if you choose for them to, and supporting you through the process. It's in our DNA. It's how we serve all of our enterprise customers. We'll never let that bar go down.
I know we've covered a lot in this conversation. If there were a couple of ideas you want to highlight for people and have them think about further, what would you want to make sure they take away from this?
I am so excited by the potential of networks, by the potential of the way that a strong network full of real people doing real things, solving real problems, the way that network becomes greater than the sum of its parts, the way that it can scale, the way that it can dynamically adjust to pressures in the market. That's fascinating stuff. There's real cool, nerdy network science going on behind that I'm interested in. But I don't think you need to get too deeply into the technical minutia of it. I think it's just really interesting to think about how the paradigm, the model of the industry can change as it becomes less of, hey, I'm going to call this guy on the phone and we're going to write a contract, and much more of a dynamic networked ecosystem, a complex system where people are able to come together and dynamically assemble and exchange information. Now, I'm a tech nerd, so I think about things in those terms. But I think, just really looking at how artificial intelligence and networks and specialized data are really coming together to change the industry. It's heady stuff. It requires some real thought, but I think it's just a fascinating path for us to collectively go down over the next few years, and I'm really into it.
I know you mentioned a website a little earlier in this conversation, but I am going to ask again, for people who are hearing this and they're excited, what is the best way for them to get in touch, learn more, ask a few questions?
Absolutely. TraceGains.com. Come and visit us, get a sense for all the things that we do, the solutions that we offer. And to experience the network and the marketplace, gather.tracegains.com. You can pop right in, search for something that interests you, and start to explore.
Paul, I always enjoy speaking with you and other members of the TraceGains team, especially about this. I think you guys are way out in front in a very exciting time on a very exciting topic. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been great.
Absolutely great. Always love being here. Thanks so much for having me again.
You've been listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. I've been Jeff Mix. Let's do it again soon.